I'm Brock Peters. The story of Denmark Vesey's rebellion is a relatively unknown episode in American history, which took place in Charleston, South Carolina in the early 1820s. It's a true story. In fact, much of the dialogue is based on court transcripts. The southern United States of 1822 was very different from the way many of us imagine it. The South was largely undeveloped. Cotton was not yet king. The city of Atlanta did not exist. And although slavery was dominant in Charleston in 1822, free Negroes formed a large and fairly prosperous class. Some of them had been able to buy their freedom from their masters, as Denmark Vesey had done many years before. Charleston was a cosmopolitan city. On a typical market day, you could hear accents from all over the world mixing with the Gullah dialect of the local blacks. So on the surface, Charleston seemed to be an open, if not integrated, society. But there were underlying tensions. The black population of the city, slave and free, outnumbered the whites. Charleston depended on the work of these slaves and black freedmen for its growth and survival. But the blacks were growing impatient because of a recently passed law that denied many slaves the opportunity to purchase their freedom. Yet the limited but important progress of Charleston's blacks inspired them with pride. They were beginning to feel the temptation of freedom. Frederick Douglass, the black leader who was born a slave, said it this way: "Give a slave a bad master, and he aspires to a good master. Give him a good master, and he wishes to become his own master." A vocal white minority warned of potential trouble ahead. They favored less freedom and stronger control of all the Negroes of Charleston. Their concerns had been heightened by events prior to 1822. A successful slave revolt in Santo Domingo, now called Haiti, brought the overthrown French colonists fleeing into Charleston with tales of black revolution. Much closer to home, in 1800, an American slave named Gabriel Prosser had tried to seize Richmond. And particularly ominous was the great debate in Congress in 1820 that challenged the very institution of slavery. The spirit of the Santo Domingo rebels and Gabriel Prosser did not escape certain members of the black community of Charleston, particularly Denmark Vesey. Vesey was well-to-do, educated, and a master carpenter with a thriving business. He had every reason to protect the status quo. Yet his wife Beck and his former wife Petronia, who bore his son Sandy, were slaves. So Denmark Vesey understood in a very personal way the dilemma of existing half-slave and half-free.
In 1816, Denmark Vesey and other black Methodists in Charleston elected to separate from the white church. By 1820, there were some 3,000 members of the city's African church, accounting for nearly a third of the members of the AME denomination nationwide.
The church was opening this horizon. People were experiencing this conversion so that all of a sudden they see themselves as a part of this larger world, this larger God, this cosmos, where they have rights.
When white authorities shut down Charleston's African church, church members decided it was time to orchestrate a plan to free the slaves of Charleston. They were led by Denmark Vesey.
Attempting the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. Though his revolt was unsuccessful, his attempt quietly altered the fragile thinking of South Carolinian whites that their slaves were actually happy in their current condition. But in order to understand the revolt, we have to look into the man himself. Denmark Vesey's actual birthday is unknown, but he is registered to have been purchased in the Danish Virgin Islands. His original name was Telemac, and he was brought to the US by a Captain Joseph Vesey, who found the youth to be of striking beauty and intelligence. Originally, Captain Vesey sold Denmark, but after returning back to the Virgin Islands to pick up more slaves, the man who had bought him demanded a refund. He would claim that Denmark was not fit for field work and that he would have epileptic fits. Captain Vesey would agree to take Denmark back and refunded the money. After refunding the money, instead of punishing Denmark for loss of income and time, Joseph Vesey made him a personal assistant. After returning back to South Carolina, Captain Joseph Vesey would put Denmark to work as a carpenter. But what changed the course of his life was entering his name in the Charleston lottery in 1799. A few months after entering his name, Denmark was informed that he was the winner. In total, he was awarded $1,500, $600 of which he would use to buy his freedom.
With the harsh realities of the traffic in flesh.
I think that his own experiences, being born a slave in St. Thomas, living briefly before the revolution in Saint-Domingue as a slave, being forced by Captain Vesey to go down to the docks and even bring ashore slaves who were being imported into South Carolina and get them to the slave pens in Charleston, reminded him that this was not a world of brotherhood.
A polygamist, a former slave who had purchased his freedom with money won in a lottery. Vesey called a meeting to organize the strike, excluding, he said, slaves who accepted presents of old coats from their masters, and the pastor in charge of the African church.
I one night met at Vesey's a great number of men. Vesey said the Negroes were living such an abominable life, they ought to rise. I said I was living well. He said though I was, others was not, and that it was such fools as I that were in their way. Frank.
The number of conspirators in Vesey's plot was estimated to be in the thousands, making it the most far-reaching insurrection planned in North America.
Denmark Vesey's plot against Charleston, South Carolina, was one of the most significant of the attempts to strike against slavery by American slaves. It was probably the most elaborately planned of the conspiracies that we know about. And it's interesting in several regards. One of the ways in which it's interesting is that it appeals to both biblical Christianity and to African conjure.
Call themselves master, have set themselves up as false gods, and the Bible forbids us to honor them, so we must do what we are about to do. We have gathered some weapons. I have blacksmiths forging more. How many men have we to arm?
At the shipyard, we've got over 100 good men, all willing to fight to the end.
John?
At the livery stable, I'm watched very carefully, but I've managed to recruit about 20 men from several plantations.
We need a much stronger force to cordon off the city and seize the arsenals to start the rebellion. 20 years I've planned this rebellion, 20 years. Everything I have done in this life has been focused on this moment. They may know there is a plan to take the city, so we'll move up the date and still take them by surprise. That's our advantage.
Jack Pritchett called on me. He's sometimes called Gullah Jack, sometimes Cooter Jack. He said, put into your mouth this crab claw, and you can't be wounded. He said all his country born promised to join because he was a doctor, that is a conjurer. He said his charms would not protect him from the treachery of his own color. Witness number 10, a Negro man.
Unlike Gabriel 20 years before, Vesey planned to spare few whites. But like Gabriel, his insurrection ended before it began. Vesey was informed on by one of his men and captured and sentenced to die. In the aftermath of the Vesey conspiracy, white citizens of Charleston tore down the African church, brick by brick.
It was important to raise the church. It shows the importance of these black institutions for a sense of black independence and autonomy. It's the same reason that black churches are bombed or burned today. It represents a sense of crucial autonomy for black people, and an autonomy which in Charleston had turned dangerous.
In one Friday, late in July of 1822, the state executed in one moment 22 of Vesey's followers. Instead of using the regular gallows, they simply tossed ropes over an old wall known as the Lines that was built in the northern part of Charleston.
The 22 were all slaves. A crude platform was built for them to stand on, but the platform was so low to the ground that when the slaves fell, their necks didn't break, and they were slowly strangling to death. To hasten them to the grave, the captain of the guard rode down the line, shooting each of them in the head, reloading as he went from one man to the next.